Marcus Wellington III stood in the marble foyer of his Beverly Hills mansion, adjusting his platinum cufflinks as he reviewed the evening's guest list on his gold-plated tablet. At 35, he had inherited a tech empire worth $800 million, and tonight's charity gala would showcase his latest acquisition, a collection of rare Middle Eastern artifacts that had cost him $12 million at a private auction. The artifacts were displayed throughout his sprawling home, each piece accompanied by detailed placards that Marcus had commissioned from what he believed were the finest translators money could buy. Ancient Persian pottery, Byzantine manuscripts, and Mamluk metalwork filled his climate-controlled galleries, their descriptions written in elegant English script that impressed his equally wealthy friends. "Fatima," he called sharply to the woman quietly dusting one of the display cases. "Make sure those fingerprints are completely gone before the guests arrive. I don't want Sheikh al-Rashid seeing smudges on my 13th century calligraphy." Fatima Qassem looked up from her work, her dark eyes meeting his briefly before returning to her task. At 42, she had been working as Marcus's head housekeeper for 3 years, maintaining the pristine condition of his mansion with quiet efficiency. Her colleagues knew her as a woman of few words who performed her duties flawlessly, and never complained about the long hours or Marcus's demanding personality. "Of course, Mr. Wellington," she replied in accented English, her voice soft but clear. Marcus barely acknowledged her response, his attention already shifting to the arriving catering staff. He took pride in employing what he considered authentic help for evenings like this, staff members whose ethnicities matched the theme of his latest collecting obsession. For tonight's Middle Eastern showcase, he had specifically requested that Fatima and 2 other employees of Arab descent be prominently visible to enhance what he called the, quote, cultural atmosphere. As the first guests began arriving, Marcus moved through his galleries like a proud museum director, regaling visitors with stories of his acquisitions and the extensive research he had commissioned for each piece. He particularly enjoyed stopping before a magnificent 14th-century Quran stand, its intricate Arabic calligraphy gleaming under carefully positioned spotlights. "This piece," he announced to a small group gathered around him, "contains some of the most beautiful religious poetry ever written. My translator spent weeks deciphering the ancient script to provide this magnificent description." He gestured grandly toward the placard beside the stand, which read in flowing script, sacred verses celebrating the divine nature of earthly abundance and the righteousness of material prosperity, encouraging believers to embrace wealth as a sign of God's favor. The guests murmured appreciatively, several taking photos of the piece and its description. Marcus basked in their admiration, particularly enjoying the impressed nods from Sheikh al-Rashid, a Kuwaiti businessman whose approval could open doors to even more exclusive auction houses. Fatima moved quietly through the gathering, refilling champagne glasses and removing empty plates. As she approached Marcus's group, she couldn't help but glance at the placard he was discussing so enthusiastically. Her steps slowed almost imperceptibly as she read the translation, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to barely concealed shock. "The craftsmanship is truly extraordinary," Sheikh al-Rashid was saying, leaning closer to examine the calligraphy. "Though I must admit, I'm having trouble reconciling this translation with the actual Arabic text." Marcus laughed dismissively. "Well, obviously the ancient script requires specialized expertise to interpret properly. My translator is one of the most expensive in Los Angeles. She charges $3,000 per piece. I'm sure she knows what she's doing better than any of us." Sheikh al-Rashid's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing more. However, Fatima noticed the questioning look he exchanged with his wife, a prominent scholar of Islamic art, who was studying the piece with growing confusion. As the evening progressed, Marcus continued his guided tours, stopping at each artifact to share what he believed were profound insights into their cultural significance. At a magnificent brass lamp decorated with intricate Arabic inscriptions, he proudly read from another placard, "Ancient blessing calling upon Allah to grant the owner unlimited wealth, power over enemies, and dominion over all lesser beings." This time, several of the Middle Eastern guests exchanged openly concerned glances. Dr. Amira Hassan, a professor of Islamic studies at UCLA, who had attended as Sheikh al-Rashid's guest, stepped closer to examine the actual Arabic text. Her face grew troubled as she read the genuine inscription, which bore no resemblance to the translation Marcus was so proudly displaying. Fatima watched these exchanges with growing distress. She had remained silent during her years of employment, focusing on her work, and ignoring Marcus's casual prejudices and cultural insensitivity. But seeing him display these sacred texts with completely fabricated translations, turning religious verses into materialistic propaganda, was becoming unbearable. The breaking point came when Marcus led his guests to the centerpiece of his collection, a rare manuscript page from a 13th-century Sufi mystical text. The genuine Arabic text was a beautiful meditation on spiritual poverty and the dangers of worldly attachment, written by the renowned mystic Ibn Arabi. But Marcus's commissioned translation presented it as an ancient business philosophy promoting ruthless capitalism and divine endorsement of wealth accumulation. This particular piece, Marcus announced with obvious pride, perfectly captures the Islamic understanding of prosperity as a divine right. The ancient Sufi masters clearly understood that financial success was the ultimate expression of spiritual development. Dr. Hassan could no longer remain silent. "Mr. Wellington, I must respectfully suggest that there may be some error in this translation. This appears to be from Ibn Arabi's writings on fana, the mystical concept of spiritual annihilation and detachment from worldly concerns." Marcus's smile became condescending. "Dr. Hassan, I appreciate your interest, but I've invested heavily in professional translation services. These interpretations come from certified experts who understand the historical context much better than modern academics, who may have political motivations to misrepresent the pro-business attitudes of medieval Islamic culture." The room fell uncomfortably silent. Dr. Hassan's face flushed with indignation, while Sheikh al-Rashid looked as though he had been personally insulted. Several other guests shifted nervously, sensing the tension but unsure of its source. It was at this moment that Fatima quietly stepped forward, her serving tray balanced in one hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Wellington," she said softly. Marcus turned with obvious irritation. "What is it, Fatima? Can't you see I'm entertaining guests?" "I am sorry to interrupt," she continued, her accent seeming more pronounced as her nervousness increased, "but I think there is small mistake with the writing on this paper." Marcus's expression shifted from irritation to incredulous amusement. "A mistake? Fatima, this translation cost me $3,000 from one of the most prestigious linguistic consulting firms in the country. I hardly think a housekeeper is qualified to judge their work." A few guests chuckled uncomfortably at Marcus's dismissive tone, while others looked embarrassed by his casual cruelty. Dr. Hassan and Sheikh al-Rashid watched with growing interest, as Fatima maintained her composure despite the public humiliation. "Perhaps I am wrong," Fatima said quietly, "but the Arabic words, they say something different from the English writing." Marcus's laughter became louder and more mocking. "Oh, really? And I suppose you're an expert in 13th-century Arabic calligraphy? Did you perhaps earn a PhD in medieval Islamic studies while you were learning to fold fitted sheets?" The room's atmosphere grew decidedly chilly as Marcus's cruelty became impossible to ignore. Several guests looked genuinely appalled by his treatment of Fatima, while others stared at their feet in embarrassment. But Fatima straightened her shoulders and met Marcus's mocking gaze directly. When she spoke again, her voice was clear and steady, and her accent had mysteriously disappeared. "Actually, Mr. Wellington, I did earn a PhD in medieval Islamic studies from Oxford University, with a specialization in Sufi mystical literature and paleographic analysis of Arabic manuscripts. This particular text is from Ibn Arabi's Fusus al-Hikam, specifically the chapter on the wisdom of poverty in the word of Ibrahim." The room fell completely silent. Marcus's smug expression faltered as Fatima continued, her transformation from subservient domestic worker to confident scholar stunning everyone present. The text reads, "Know that poverty is a divine quality, for Allah is independent of all worlds. Whoever realizes poverty becomes qualified by this divine quality. The dervish seeks nothing from creation, for his need is fulfilled by his Lord alone. Beware of attachment to worldly things, for they veil you from the truth of your own nothingness before Allah." She gestured calmly toward the placard that Marcus had been so proudly displaying. "Your translator has somehow transformed Ibn Arabi's warning against materialism into an endorsement of wealth accumulation. It's not just inaccurate, it's the exact opposite of what the text actually says." Dr. Hassan stepped forward, her face bright with recognition and respect. "Dr. Qassem, Fatima Qassem? You're the scholar who wrote the definitive translation of Ibn Arabi's private letters for Cambridge University Press. I used your work extensively in my own research. Marcus looked back and forth between the two women, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing horror as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "That's impossible," he sputtered. "Fatima is my housekeeper. She's been cleaning my house for 3 years. She doesn't even speak English properly most of the time." Fatima smiled sadly. "My English is perfectly fluent, Mr. Wellington. I adopted an accent and simplified my speech, because I learned that wealthy Americans find accented domestic workers more authentic and trustworthy. It made it easier to find employment when I needed it most." Sheikh al-Rashid stepped closer, his expression a mixture of recognition and outrage. "Dr. Qasim, aren't you the scholar who was forced to flee Syria after writing articles critical of the Assad regime? The one whose university position was eliminated when she sought asylum in the United States?" Fatima nodded quietly. "I arrived in Los Angeles 4 years ago with nothing but my education. American universities told me my Syrian credentials needed, quote, extensive verification that could take years. My English was considered too accented for teaching positions. I needed work immediately to support myself and send money to family members still in refugee camps. Domestic work was the only employment I could find quickly." Marcus stared at her in growing dismay, finally beginning to comprehend that he had been employing one of the world's leading experts on the very artifacts he collected, while simultaneously mocking her expertise and paying charlatans thousands of dollars for translations that any first-year Arabic student would recognize as fraudulent. "Dr. Qasim," Dr. Hassan said warmly, "I had no idea you were in Los Angeles. The academic community has been wondering what happened to you after your asylum application. Your scholarship on mystical literature is groundbreaking." "Thank you," Fatima replied. "I have continued my research when possible, but survival took priority over scholarship." Marcus found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "If you're really this famous scholar, why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you let me display these incorrect translations?" Fatima's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Wellington, in the 3 years I have worked for you, you have never once asked my opinion about anything more complex than which cleaning products to use. You introduced me to guests as your authentic Middle Eastern help, and told stories about how you specifically hired Arabs to enhance the cultural atmosphere of your collection. You made it clear that my value to you was as an exotic decoration, not as a human being with thoughts or expertise." The room's tension was now palpable. Several guests were openly staring at Marcus with disgust, while others were taking out their phones to capture what was clearly becoming a social media moment. Furthermore, Fatima continued, every one of these translations is not just wrong but deliberately misleading. Your prestigious consulting firm appears to have taken sacred Islamic texts about spiritual humility, charity, and detachment from worldly goods, and transformed them into celebrations of greed and materialism. Whether this was done out of ignorance or malice, I cannot say, but the result is deeply offensive to anyone who understands the actual meaning of these works. Sheikh al-Rashid stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Mr. Wellington, you invited me here specifically because you knew I collect authentic Islamic art. You wanted my endorsement of your collection for insurance and resale purposes. But what you have shown me tonight is not cultural appreciation, it is cultural vandalism." Marcus's face had gone completely pale. I paid top dollar for these translations. The firm came highly recommended. They assured me of complete accuracy." Dr. Hassan pulled out her phone and quickly searched for the consulting firm Marcus had used. "Linguistic Solutions International," she read aloud. "Mr. Wellington, this company's website shows that their Arabic specialists have degrees in business administration and marketing. Not one of them has any background in classical Arabic, Islamic studies, or historical linguistics." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had spent $12 million on authentic artifacts, then thousands more on fraudulent translations that transformed their spiritual meaning into materialistic propaganda. Worse, he had displayed this cultural butchery to actual experts, while mocking the one person in the room who could have prevented his humiliation. "Dr. Qasim," he said desperately, "surely you understand that this was all a misunderstanding. If you had told me about your background, I would have—" "You would have what?" Fatima interrupted. "Fired me for lying about my qualifications? Accused me of trying to take advantage of your generosity? Mr. Wellington, you have made your attitudes toward people like me very clear. I was useful to you. as long as I remain silent, subservient, and appropriately grateful for the privilege of cleaning your house." She gestured toward the artifacts around them. These pieces represent centuries of spiritual wisdom and artistic achievement. They were created by people who believed that true wealth comes from generosity, humility, and service to others. You have turned them into endorsements of everything they actually warn against. Marcus looked around the room desperately, seeing his reputation crumbling in real time. Several guests were already heading toward the exit, while others were furiously typing on their phones. The charity gala he had planned as a showcase of his cultural sophistication had become a public exposure of his ignorance and prejudice. "Please," he said to Fatima, his voice cracking, "surely we can work something out. I can have the translations corrected, I can give you proper credit, I can even offer you a position as my cultural consultant." Fatima shook her head slowly. "Mr. Wellington, the damage is already done, but more importantly, you still don't understand what you've done wrong. You're not offering to learn from this experience or examine your assumptions about people from my background. You're trying to buy your way out of embarrassment and continue exploiting my expertise while maintaining the same power dynamic that created this situation." She set down her serving tray and removed her apron, folding it neatly and placing it on the nearest table. "I will not be returning to work here." "Dr. Hassan, Sheikh al-Rashid, it has been an honor to meet you both. Perhaps we can discuss collaboration opportunities soon." As Fatima walked toward the exit with quiet dignity, Dr. Hassan hurried after her. "Dr. Qasim, please wait. I would very much like to discuss a visiting scholar position at UCLA. Your expertise is exactly what our department needs." Sheikh al-Rashid joined them, pulling out his business card. "And I have been seeking a consultant for my own collection authentication. Your reputation in academic circles is impeccable." Marcus stood alone among his artifacts, watching his former housekeeper transform back into Dr. Fatima Qasim, internationally respected scholar, as she was surrounded by admirers and potential collaborators. The millionaire who had mocked her Arabic translation found himself stunned not just by her perfect response, but by the realization that he had been employing someone far more qualified than himself to judge the value and meaning of his prized collection. The evening that was supposed to establish Marcus Wellington III as a serious collector of Islamic art instead became the night he learned that true cultural appreciation requires humility, respect, and recognition of others' expertise. Lessons that no amount of money could buy, but that a Syrian refugee working as a housekeeper had tried to teach him through 3 years of quiet dignity and flawless service. As the last guests departed, leaving Marcus alone with his $12 million worth of artifacts and their fraudulent translations, he finally understood that the most valuable treasure in his house had been walking among his guests all evening, refilling their champagne glasses while possessing the knowledge to unlock the true meaning of every piece in his collection. But by then, Dr. Fatima Qasim was already gone, carrying her expertise to people who would value both her scholarship and her humanity. 6 months later, Marcus Wellington III sat in his attorney's office, signing papers to liquidate his entire art collection. The story of his humiliation had spread throughout social media and art circles, earning him the nickname, the fake translation millionaire. Major auction houses refused to work with him, cultural institutions declined his donations, and his social circle had evaporated overnight. The Syrian refugee scholar's story has gone viral again, his publicist informed him glumly. Dr. Qasim just received a MacArthur Fellowship for her work preserving Middle Eastern manuscripts. Every interview mentions how you treated her. Meanwhile, Fatima Qasim stood in her new office at UCLA, surrounded by books and manuscripts, preparing for her evening seminar on Islamic mystical poetry. Through her window, she could see students gathering in the courtyard, eager to learn from the professor who had become famous not just for her scholarship, but for her grace under pressure. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sheikh al-Rashid. "The authentication of my collection is complete. Your expertise saved me from purchasing 3 forgeries. Thank you for your integrity." Fatima smiled, remembering the night when Marcus had mocked her Arabic translation. She had learned that the truth always finds its voice, even when that voice belongs to someone society has chosen not to hear. Sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from those who serve quietly in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to illuminate the darkness of ignorance with the light of knowledge. Marcus Wellington III had discovered too late that respect cannot be purchased, authenticity cannot be faked, and the person you dismiss as beneath your notice may possess exactly the wisdom you desperately need. In trying to buy cultural sophistication, he had lost everything, while the woman whose expertise he had scorned had gained the recognition she had always deserved. The Millionaire's mansion now stood empty, its halls echoing with the memory of a Syrian scholar's perfect response that had changed both their lives forever. 2 years later, Dr. Fatima Qassem published her groundbreaking book, Voices in Translation: The Hidden Wisdom of Medieval Islamic Texts, which became a bestseller and transformed how museums worldwide approached Middle Eastern artifacts. She established the first refugee scholar program in California, helping displaced academics find positions that matched their expertise rather than forcing them into survival jobs. At the book launch event held at the Getty Museum, Fatima was surrounded by colleagues, former students, and dignitaries who had come to celebrate her achievement. As she signed copies for a long line of admirers, someone placed a familiar book on the table before her. She looked up to see Marcus Wellington III, noticeably thinner and wearing a simple suit instead of his former designer clothing. His empire had crumbled under the weight of scandal, forcing him to sell everything and take a modest job teaching business basics at a community college. "Dr. Qassem," he said quietly, "I wanted to apologize properly, and to thank you." Fatima studied his face, seeing genuine humility where arrogance once lived. "Thank you for what, Mr. Wellington?" "For showing me that wisdom doesn't come with a price tag," he replied. "And that the most valuable education I ever received came from someone I was too proud to listen to." Fatima signed his book with a simple inscription: "Truth speaks all languages to those willing to hear it." As Marcus walked away, Fatima reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from cleaning houses to international recognition. She had learned that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in proving others wrong, but in remaining true to yourself until the world is ready to see your worth. The millionaire who had mocked her Arabic translation had indeed been stunned by her perfect response, but the real perfection had been in her patient dignity, her quiet persistence, and her unwavering belief that knowledge, like truth, eventually finds its rightful place in the world. In the end, both their lives had been transformed by a single moment of courage, when a scholar disguised as a servant decided that some truths were too important to remain silent.